back to the Menagerie. Let's talk about some movies.
Well, it looks like we're starting off the new year with a wet blanket. I don't want to waste your time like this movie wasted mine, so let's just say thank God the Snyder-related universe is finally at an end. Everything, from the dollar store Lord of the Rings stuff to the repetitive villain motives to the rough CGI, Aquaman 2 made me realize these movies are drowning. The last scene of Aquaman 2 is actually a great metaphor for the DCEU, a cockroach cheeseburger. There were a couple tasty parts of every DC movie from Man of Steel to this one, but overall this not-so-happy meal was pretty inedible. Recent superhero movies like this one, Ant-Man Quantumania, Morbius, Thor Love and Thunder, and most of the Disney Plus MCU shows have diluted the superhero market and reverted the genre to its pre-MCU days of quasi-cultural embarrassment. Marvel is flailing, DC is about to reboot, and audiences have never cared less. Basically, the people in charge of making these movies are at a fork in the road. It's time to grow with the audiences that have been watching these for decades and change up the old formulas. Or they can keep pumping out big budget slop dependent on overworked visual effects artists and hacky jokes, and keep wondering why they aren't making any money and watching the house burn down. Shit, I was supposed to keep this one short. Okay, next. Who's ready for another big dumb CGI spectacle that tries to build a connected universe? Anybody? At least this one threw in a little seasoning. For one, after 6 movies including a spin-off, we finally have our first Transformers with people of color in the lead. The writing is still pretty corny, but the hero, played by Anthony Ramos, having a little brother was a nice bit of heart that the Wahlberg-era movies lacked. Dominique Fishback co-headlines and, got paid, so that's good. PSA, go watch Swarm. It's a super underrated thriller show on Prime Video. I remember watching a few Beast Wars episodes as a kid in the 90s, and I think I had the Cheetor toy, so admittedly, it did tickle a little nostalgia nerve for me. The best part of the film is probably the sound design, because if you have a good sound system, the rumbling of the primes and the villains put a real tingle in your jingle. However, Peter Cullen, Ron Perlman, and Peter Dinklage all do kinda sound the same. But yeah, this is a wonderfully loud movie if you need to drown out the sound of your roommates playing video games or, say, having sex. Speaking from personal experiences. Moving on. Godzilla Minus One had a lot of hype before I got to see it, and it definitely fucks. It's not perfect, but if you can get on board with the very melodramatic acting, then you'll agree this is probably the best Godzilla movie in years. I've also heard good things about Shin Godzilla, but as far as the big budget kaiju movie, this knocks the American versions clean out of the water. Speaking of which, there's one scene that is very visually similar to the Godzilla vs. Kong scene, when Navy vessels are destroyed by Godzilla, but in Minus One, he's treated more like the shark from Jaws, which is much more terrifying. Kudos to director Takashi Yamazaki and the team for bringing not only a good blockbuster, but for actually making me care about the humans for once. Minus One accomplishes what Rise of the Beasts and Aquaman 2 try to, but in a much more sophisticated and elevated way, especially when it comes to the human relationships. The pilot and his wife are the heart and soul of the story. Following the trend of modern blockbusters, Godzilla Minus One also has amazing CGI action scenes and even ends with the universe-building tease, so it's clear that the execution and attention to detail makes a world of difference in these kind of movies. I try to watch an animated movie every month, and I'm happy I checked this one out. I remember hearing about it from the Animated React series, which is a must-watch for any fans of animation. The artists on the show point out some overlooked details like hand-drawn elements and behind-the-scene animation secrets. After I realized The Bad Guys was a heist movie, I was instantly down. Sam Rockwell kinda does a version of George Clooney's Mr. Fox from Fantastic Mr. Fox, in that he's slick, sly, and sassy, but ultimately has a heart of gold. It's got a lot of the usual heist tropes that you would expect, with double crossings and sleight of hands, but the great visuals and quick-paced plot makes for a pretty fun watch. It might not have a lot of rewatchability for adults, but I could see a younger person loving this, especially 11 to 14 age range, when they're almost too cool for animated movies, but also might have some knowledge of movies like Baby Driver or Ocean's 11 to really appreciate the heisty moments. Self-Reliance is a comedy crime thriller written, directed, and starring the hilarious Jake Johnson. In a world where white guy, comedian, actor, writer types are getting to dip their toes into the directing realm, this is another one. I enjoyed the ride on this one, and I think Johnson did a great job for a debut, but there's something missing that just makes it not quite shelf-worthy. For one, it's basically a comedy take on David Fincher's 1997 movie The Game, starring Michael Douglas and Sean Penn.
They're trying to kill me.
Who's behind this? Who did this to me? Why?
Is is all the game.
While Johnson definitely has better comedic chops than Fincher, he doesn't hold a candle to the suspenseful direction that Fincher is known for. And I know the goal of Self-Reliance is jokes rather than mystery, but the hidden cabal of wealthy sadists in the movie never has much of a menacing presence, nor does it ever really feel like he's being watched. I'll admit it's pretty funny every time Eduardo Franco and his group of Sprockets ninjas pop up, but obviously that takes the wind out of any tension.
Now's the time when Sprocket Family dies!
That said, it also doesn't convincingly portray that it might all be in his head, nor did I fully believe the chemistry between him and Anna Kendrick's character. I did have a good enough time watching this, I don't want to totally shit on it, but it's kind of telling when the character that stole the show was James, played by a man named Biff Whiff. No joke. Biff Whiff. Alright, the movie that was all over TikTok for a couple weeks, Saltburn, is a dark comedy thriller written and directed by Emerald Fennell, who's most known for Promising Young Woman. Saltburn stars up-and-comers Barry Keoghan and Jacob Elordi, set at Oxford University. My bar was low going into this movie, which was thankfully streaming on Prime Video because I was not about to pay for another rich white people doing shitty things kind of movie. Between Knives Out, Succession, White Lotus, and Real Life, I'm good with not seeing another rich white family fuck over poor people for entertainment. That said, this one does subvert a couple expectations and has some really gross out moments that I didn't see coming. Plus, Barry Keoghan shows full dong, so that's cool if you're into that. I've seen some theories going around describing this as a modern telling of the Greek myth about the Minotaur and the maze, but either way, I thought it was a well-done tense thriller that could have shaved off some of the intro, but I'm always advocating for shorter runtimes on everything, so that's just me. The cinematography was also super compelling because, I'll be honest, I expected this movie to look like you just walked into a rave and there's different colors everywhere at all times, but there were actually moments of natural appreciation and contemplative imagery that was pretty cool. Plus, the 4:3 aspect ratio makes almost every frame a painting. For the horror portion of this month's Menagerie, I watched The Ritual. And I'm going to keep this one short because despite having great performances and great gory prosthetics, this one is pretty simple and straightforward. A group of hikers go into the woods and bad things happen. There's a little hint at some lore with witchcraft-like glyphs carved into trees and frightening idols made of straw and antlers, but those moments are sparse and not really the focus of the movie. The film centers around a group of friends who get together after one of their buddies dies, but it's revealed later that the main character feels partially responsible, and that's the main theme of this film: guilt and grief. Upon rewatch, it's clear that the woods they're stuck in is a metaphor for grief because when you lose someone, you can easily lose yourself. Fumbling through isolating feelings, even when with a group of friends, it isn't until you confront your demons and the subconscious can you make your way back to civilization. It's a ritual of mourning, so to speak. Sometimes grief just feels like your heart has been torn from your chest, or your soul ripped in two, and all you can do is keep putting one foot in front of the other, a day at a time. Cinephiles, aka film nerds, have talked about Oldboy since its release 20 years ago, and I was pretty sure something fucked up was going to happen that I couldn't unsee, so I was never ready to invest the emotional damage. I'm also kind of cheap, so when it showed up on Netflix and I didn't have to pay to rent it, I decided that was a sign. I have several friends that say this is one of their favorite movies of all time, so I was definitely set up for disappointment, but probably no shocker here, it was incredible. If you can handle the traumatic and triggering events of the second half of the film, it's easy to see why this is one of the greats. From the fantastic score by Jo Yeon-wook to the performances and writing, it's a nearly perfect film. It isn't for the faint of heart, but it's not just a great thriller. It's also a great action movie with some great comedy. When he's in an elevator with a woman for the first time since his release, Shae Min-sik's physical comedy is pitch perfect. Director Park Chan-wook is able to deftly bounce between genres and tones in the same picture without whiplash, but don't get me wrong, the movie is a tragedy. I've never seen a movie capture the insanity of how 15 years locked inside a single room must feel the way that Oldboy does. And it does in the first 15 minutes of the film. His desperation for human contact after he's released sets up his blindness to the dark twist in the third act, but if you haven't seen it, go now before it's spoiled. The final film of the month was Anatomy of a Fall, a French film from director Justine Triet. This is a courtroom drama, but also a film that entirely centers around whether or not the main character, Sandra, killed her husband. Firstly, the performances are all perfect across the board. I think it's just a smidge too long. Not much, maybe only like 8 to 10 minutes, but still noticeable that me and others were shifting in our seats toward the end. The only problem is I watched 30 seconds of the trailer and knew how it was going to end. Because the trailer and most of the movie is about how the evidence piles up against the wife played by Sandra Hüller, there's only two options for the ending. Option 1, she was telling the truth and didn't kill her husband, but some third party like a jealous mistress killed him. Or Option 2, they leave it ambiguous, but implying Sandra gets away with murder. I was leaning towards Option 2, and yeah, I was right. So I think it got a little overhyped because we're living in a drought of adult dramas that have been wiped out by blockbusters, but it's still a wonderful and much needed 90s style thriller throwback. Kinda reminded me of The Firm. That was this month's Menagerie. Thanks for watching.